Hello, hello. I'm Casey.
I'm Fallon.
And this is Render the Darkness. That is not as easy to do on a stream record, is it?
No.
Hey, here's another little thing I didn't factor in. Oh, yeah.
That just threw me off.
I know, that's... Sorry, guys, we're having to do this not at the same location. Obviously, we're doing this. It would be hilarious if we were sitting right next to each other doing this. But we're not. We're not. So I have a really stupid question, because we've only done this a couple times. If I have my notes, like, expanded, is that going to block my being recorded?
You mean like if you have a window open?
Yeah, if I make my notes, the only thing I can see, am I still visible on the recording?
Yeah, you're still good.
So you can still see me right now?
Oh, where'd you go?
Ha ha ha.
Yeah, I can still see you.
But seriously, can you see me?
Darker, but yeah.
Okay, because there's not really a way for me to... I mean, I guess we probably should have messed around with this before. I'm just going to block your face.
Oh, that's rude.
Well, that's literally the space that I need to expand this so I can see all the words. I think. Let me double check. Yeah, that's it. That's what I need. Just your face space. Okay.
Of course.
Are we ready?
Yep.
She's like, we better be. We're almost 2 minutes in. Okay, so this case is going to be on Bonny Lee Bakley. We are doing our final case for California. After this, we'll move on to Colorado. But for now, let's focus on this one. It's part of our 50-state series. For those of you who don't know that we are doing that, we're doing 2 true crime at least, and at least 1 paranormal / folklore / cryptid case out of every state in the United States. So if you have any recommendations, still got plenty of time to get them in. We're only just now wrapping up California with this case. Okay, fun fact for this episode is that the spots on a giraffe are much the same as fingerprints for humans in that no giraffe has the same spot pattern. They're all different.
Oh, that's neat. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either. I also thought that was a pretty interesting little fact. Also, if anybody gets confused about what's going on behind me, there's a dream catcher, and I'm noticing that every time I move my head, you can slightly see one of the feathers sticking out the side of my head. It's a dream catcher, just so. I'll try not to move.
Well, I was going to say, hey, if y'all see my screen doing this, my cat's back there and she won't leave me alone.
Oh, the fun times of doing... This is why we like to record when we're next to each other, because we don't have anywhere near this amount of explaining to do. Hold on. I got a thing. Okay. It was
great.
Sorry. Okay, so back to the case. Sorry.
It froze right when you're laughing. Oh, no.
Okay.
Oh.
Anyway, back to the case. Okay, so this case, it's a little bit of a whirlwind. There's a lot going on, so it may be a little bit hard to keep up with everything. I did my best to line these events out the way that they, like in the order that they occurred, but there was a lot happening here, so stick with me on this one, if you can, please. Bonny Lee Bakley, later known as LeeBonny, was born on June 7th, 1956 in Morristown, New Jersey. Her parents' names were Edward John Bakley and Marjorie Louise Bakley. She was one of 4 children. She had a sister named Marjorie Lisa Bakley and 2 brothers, Joe Bakley and Peter Clayton. Just kidding, Peter Carleon. Don't know why I said Clayton. It's not even close.
Carleon. Okay.
Bonny was raised primarily by her grandmother, She also hated that she grew up without much, and she dreamed desperately of a greater life. She wanted to be famous. Like, more than anything in the world, she wanted to be famous. She wanted to live a lavish life, and at just 16 years old, she would set off in an attempt to do just that. She would head off for New York City in pursuit of that dream. She enrolled in the Barbizon School of Modeling in hopes to learn about and gain a career in acting and modeling. She did actually land some modeling gigs here and there, and she was also able to be an extra in some stuff along the way, but nothing really came out of it for her. But this school is also where she would meet her first husband. His name was Evangelos Polakis. It was 1971 at this point, and before I tell you more about him, let me just tell you ahead of time, Bonny had 10 husbands in total.
Ooh, that's a lot of husbands.
That's a lot of husbands. I'm going to briefly mention all of them, but when I say briefly, I mean some of them will be super brief. Like, one of the marriages only lasted 24 hours. I don't think they even actually physically stayed together the whole 24 hours. So, it's not much to tell on some of these.
Gotcha.
The focus for this case, though, still remains about Bonny Lee and her tragic end, but that centers around her 10th and final marriage. So we will get into a little more details about this one than all of the rest of them, just because that's when pretty much everything happened. So if it seems like I'm kind of flying through the marriage list, I kind of am, but it's just because most of them aren't really pertinent to what the case is about.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yep.
And I also tell you that because there's going to be some pretty well-known and prestigious names thrown around in this case, so it might also get a little bit confusing on who she was married to and who she wasn't, so I will do my best to clarify which ones were her husbands and which ones were just people she was seeing or met or introduced to or knew.
Okay.
So back to Evangelos. This marriage was more one out of circumstance rather than anything else. It was more like a let's make a deal kind of situation rather than a love story. Evangelos was an immigrant and desperately needed a green card in order to stay in America. So, seeing his desperation as an opportunity, Bonny proposed that she would marry him for a fee.
Oh.
Yeah. After some discussion... Huh?
I'm pretty sure that's illegal.
Is it? Is that illegal? I don't know if that's illegal or not, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I mean, this was the 70s, so... You know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was back then, but I'm pretty sure... I don't know, I'm thinking you're not supposed to, like, pay somebody to marry you.
Well, what about all these shows, like the 90 Day Fiancé and the, those kinds of things, where that's kind of basically the whole premise, is like...
Yeah, but they're already in the state. Like, they're already in the country. Like, I think if you're trying to get in the country, I don't think you're supposed to... Because you're supposed to do it for love, I think. I'll have to look that up now. Now I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that one. But either way, after some discussion, the two came up with an amount, and the deal was made. Now, Bonny did marry Evangelos, like she made in her deal she would, but unfortunately, he put a little too much trust and confidence in Bonny. He went ahead and paid her the requested fee for marrying him before he had actually received his green card.
Oh, no.
And literally, as soon as the money was in her hand, she filed for divorce. Shortly after, he would be deported, and as far as Bonny was concerned, this was even more of a clean slate than she had anticipated, so she was off to do whatever she wanted, free and clear, without any ties to Evangelos.
Bad.
It was still 1971 when all of this happened, so they weren't even married that long at all. After Evangelos, her next husband was Paul Gawron, I think is how you say it. That's how the internet lady who pronounces stuff said it. So that's how... I'm going to call him Paul. Gawron is his last name. I don't think the little computer lady said it right. So I'm going to call him Paul. Anyway, that was her second husband, and she married him in 1977. She was 21 years old at the time, and this would actually end up being her longest marriage out of all of them. They would go on to have 2 children together, Glenn Paul Garan and Holly Lee Garan. Their marriage would last for 5 years, with the couple divorcing in 1982. I don't know if it's important to the case or it isn't important to the case, but I will go ahead and say one additional fact about this relationship is that they were first cousins. I don't know if that's important or not, but it is a fact, so I will keep it in there. From what I understand, the reason their relationship ended is because of Bonnie's obsession with becoming famous. She was insistent on becoming famous one way or another. She actually went on to start her own business in 1982, which is the same year her and Paul would go on to get a divorce. She would actually give Paul the children.
Oh.
She did. She gave them to him.
Which, I mean, I'm not saying because, the dad's got them, but I mean, it's like, how can you just give your children,
her focus was somewhere else. She wanted fame, and she was ready to really hone in her focus on that.
Yeah.
So the mail order business she started up was really more of a way to scam men out of their money. The business consisted of her sending and selling nudes to men, nudes of herself as well as other women. She would also take out ads in the Lonely Heart columns, which she, by all rights, was very successful in what she was doing. The business, combined with her ads, would allow her enough funds to buy a few houses in Memphis, Tennessee, and a house close to Los Angeles.
Go her.
I mean, it was successful. She was doing something. I don't want to say right, because nothing that she did was right, but she was doing something successfully.
Yeah.
This was also around the time she would start going by the alias LeeBonny, as I mentioned earlier, which was intended to be her stage name for when she hopefully had gained a career in Hollywood as an actress as well as a singer, but unfortunately that never quite happened. I know the business she started seemed to just come out of nowhere. However, her sister was able to shed at least some partial light on where the idea of that might have come from. According to Bonnie's sister, around the time that Bonnie was 11 to 12-ish, she and her sister had accidentally found a pool party being hosted by a nudist colony. Bonnie was immediately quite enamored with it and the idea of it, and began frequently attending these parties and any other events that the nudist colony would host. Unfortunately, shortly after she began doing that, they began taking photos of her, which she was a kid, so she didn't really think too far into the reasons why they were doing that. All she was focused on was the attention she was getting. It's something that she had never really gotten before, and she quickly became obsessed with the prospect of a constant influx of attention. This is seemingly what sparked her obsession with celebrity and fame in the first place, and also played a big role in her decision to go to New York City in pursuit of becoming a model in the first place.
Well, she was 12.
She was 12 when she first started going to their parties and events. Yeah, she was.
I can't believe they would let her go in there at 12.
70s, man. 70s. So back to her business. Remember, I mentioned she made enough money to buy a couple houses in Memphis, Tennessee, and Los Angeles. Those weren't random location picks. She chose Los Angeles because she planned to move there so she could focus once again on her music and acting career, but again, it didn't really work out the way that she had hoped. She, in fact, essentially had zero success in either of those things outside of a few gigs. She was an extra in a movie here and there again, but again, it didn't really take off or get her anywhere.
Okay.
Her next plan was to figure out how to make more money faster with her business, so she amped up what she was doing as far as scamming. She began at this point writing bad checks and forging driver's licenses. She was also stealing credit cards from the men who were responding to her ads. And of course, this kind of a business, it's going to come with some legal issues.
Yeah, I would say.
And the crazy part is like, I'm fixing to get into her legal issues, but the crazy part about it is that, like, while she was doing all of this, she was getting married in between. Like, she just steadily continues to get married.
In between her legal troubles?
In between all of her legal troubles, in between her continuing to run her business, in between her buying her houses, she never stopped getting married for like a 15-year span almost, it seemed like. It was crazy.
Right.
So, one of the worst punishments she received for all of her misdoings was her being required to work in a penal farm on the weekends for, I believe I read, 2 years in one source and 3 in another. For those of you who don't know what a penal farm is, it is not what it sounds like, because I had to take a second and reread that because I'm 5. Dead. It's actually where inmates, usually misdemeanor convicted inmates, work outside through farming, agriculture, and other outdoor manual labor jobs. So it's like a work reform program. And yes, I realize Bonnie wasn't actually an inmate, but that's what she was sentenced to, so I don't know.
Okay, you might want to start that part over because everything just went black.
Which part? About the penal farm?
Yeah, like right after you said, like, I'm 5. I want to start that part over because, like, everything went black.
Okay, so it's because I'm 5, it's actually where inmates, usually misdemeanor convicted inmates, work outside through farming, agriculture, and other outdoor manual labor jobs. So it's like a work reform program, and yes, I realize Bonnie wasn't an inmate, but that's what she was sentenced to, so I don't know.
Okay.
Now that we've talked about her business and the direction it's took, let's get back to her personal relationships, because these play a huge role in the direction of where Bonnie's life goes. In 1984, Bonnie would marry a retired handwriting analyst named Robert Moon, but the couple would divorce in 1987. I couldn't actually find a lot on Robert Moon, so I'm not really sure why they divorced, but I can tell you that they didn't have any kids together.
Okay.
Her next marriage came in 1988, and that was to one of the men who had responded to one of her ads. His name, and I really actually like this name. Anyway, his name was D. Mart C. Besley. He was a widower from Montana, and apparently, after they said their vows, he had given Bonnie like a roll of quarters so she could go play the slots, and she took off and was never seen or heard from by Beasley again.
So she married this guy, he gave her a roll of quarters, and she's like...
And she bounced. Yep, wow. That's it. That was the end of it. She bounced. This left him pretty devastated and kind of fascinated all at the same time. The relationship, although it was extremely short-lived, it really impacted him. Like, he would go on to write a manuscript specifically about Bonnie. It was titled, see if I can say this right, Ubiquitous Bonnie, Mistress of Sham. For those that don't know what ubiquitous means, because I didn't, it means existing or being everywhere at the same time.
Huh.
I'd never heard that word.
Huh.
His niece was given the manuscript upon his death, and I do know that she did try to get it published, or at one point was gonna try to get it published, but I couldn't really find anything on whether or not that ever actually happened. I would like to read it if it did ever happen, but I couldn't find anything. From what I understand, the manuscript was mostly pertaining to her quote-unquote ways, like her promiscuity and desires to be rich and famous, and also his obsession with her and how much he loved her despite herself. And he also wrote a lot about how he had this kind of draw to her, and he really couldn't understand where it came from or why he couldn't really seem to help himself with his obsession about her. Yeah, it is. It is kind of interesting. But D-Mart wouldn't be the only man who would cross paths with the charms and unexplainable drawl of Bonnie. She had this ability to kind of like captivate a person, and sometimes she could captivate like a whole room before they even realized they had been captivated by her. She just had a very like schmoozy personality. She was very charming.
Schmoozy.
Yeah, that's the word I'm going with. Schmoozy.
Schmoozy.
Let me go ahead and mention a few of her other marriages, all of which were annulled and only from a day, like, some of them were only, like, for a day, as I said, but the rest of them were pretty much just, like, a couple of weeks. So, let me mention that list real quick. So, after D. Mart, but before Robert Blake, there was Joseph Brookshire, who she married in 1992, and it was annulled in 1992. Then there was William Weber, whom she married in 1993 and annulled in 1993. Then there was E. Robert Teffelson. She married in 1994 and annulled in 1994. Then there was Glenn H. Wolfe, who she married in 1995 and annulled in 1995. This one I'm going to stop it for just a second because I thought it was kind of interesting. Wolfe was actually known as the man who had been married the most in the world. Bonnie was his 26th wife. No idea how many more he married after her, because my case wasn't really about that, but I did think it was really interesting. I may go back and look that up later just to see how many he ended up marrying. But after Wolfe, there was John Ray, who she was actually married to from 1996 to 1998.
I wonder why she married so many times. Like, I wonder if there's like a reason behind it.
I think that maybe these, I don't know, but from what I read, I think these were men that she either thought to be wealthy and found out they weren't, or thought they had some kind of pull with celebrity and then found out that they didn't.
Okay.
Like that, like she thought she could get something out of these men, and then after marrying them, she realized that she couldn't get what she thought she could get. That's kind of what I took out of her reasons for why she married and divorced so many men. I'm not really sure, though. But I do know in between those relationships, she would form another, except this one seemed to legitimately, or at least on paper, legitimately be just a friendship. She never married this man, but he did definitely do his best to help Bonnie in the entertainment industry, and that man's name was Robert Sturr. Robert had some connections that he used to help get her a role as an extra in 1985 in a film called Turk 182. Bonnie was elated and sure that this was it. This was the big break she needed, but unfortunately it was not. After concluding that, she decided to pivot. Robert actually owned and operated a music company, so Bonnie would reach out to him about trying her hand at music, and Robert would let her come in and record some songs. This would be her second attempt at a music career. At some point in the 70s, she had recorded a song called Just a Fan, but seemingly that title wasn't too inspiring because the song essentially tanked. This time she would record a couple songs, but they too would fall short of coming anywhere near the hits that Bonnie hoped they would be. One was called Tribute to Elvis Presley, and the other was called Rockabilly Love.
Rockabilly Love.
Catchy names.
Yeah, you gotta say it like that. Rockabilly Love.
Rockabilly Love. At this point, Bonnie was kind of reaching a point of realization that she may never, ever achieve the level of fame independently that she was striving for, so this is kind of where her path took a turn. She decided that if she couldn't do it on her own, then she would marry someone famous instead.
Okay.
With this new mindset, Bonnie's focus shifted to pursuing her biggest celebrity crush at the time, who was Jerry Lee Lewis, which I'm pretty sure played a part in why she bought houses in Memphis, Tennessee, because she knew that's where he lived. From what it looks like on paper, she was sort of successful in this endeavor, at least for a minute. She somehow was able to become friends with Jerry's sister, Linda Gale Lewis, who was also a musician. Soon after, Jerry and Bonnie would spark up a liking for each other, and Bonnie would soon become pregnant with what she would claim to be Jerry's baby. But there was definitely some heavy skepticism. She even went so far as to name the little girl Jerry Lee Lewis as a way to hopefully solidify to Jerry Lewis that the baby was his. But he still had his doubts, so he requested a lawyer to look into proving whether or not he actually could be the father. And I read one source that said that they did take a paternity test and it would turn out that he was not the father. Then I read a couple other sources that said they determined he wasn't the father because of his passport and the time for when he wasn't in the country, like he was doing something outside of where she was, and they kind of compared the timelines of their passports and concluded that it would be literally impossible for him to be the father. So just in case one is true or they're both true or whatever, I'm just going to throw them both in there.
Okay.
Either way, it turned out that there was no way he could be the father. I do think it's important to mention that this wasn't a quick, hey, I'm pregnant, and a quick, paternity test or proving of passports, and it was done. No. Bonnie was stalking this man and threatening his family. He was pressing charges on her for doing so, and she did have to go to court for it. However, didn't really seem to scare her a whole lot. Although Jerry's lawyers were able to prove that the baby wasn't his, and that did pretty much end whatever relationship there ever was between them, she was nowhere near ready to give up her mission of marrying somebody famous. And honestly, by this point, not to judge or whatever, but it really started looking like her main goal was to trap one of these celebrities.
Sounds like it.
Because of her relationship with Lewis, she was introduced to quite a few famous people. She, by the way, she gave that baby that she had, Jerry Lee Lewis, the little girl, she gave that baby to her ex-husband, Paul, who was, as we know, already raising the other two children that they had together, and she took back off for Los Angeles.
Lovely.
Yeah. She would make her way into social circles that allowed her to hang out and date such names as Dean Martin. I read Gary Busey, Frankie Valli, lots of famous people that she was able to mingle with and get connected with. I'm not 100% sure on the Gary Busey one, but I know for sure she dated Dean Martin.
Okay. Well, all right.
Yeah. Once she started to feel like nothing was going to come out of these, she kind of set her sights on one Mr. Christian Brando, son of American actor Marlon Brando and French model Cheyenne Brando. Keeping in mind that she was still running her ads in the Lonely Hearts columns, as well as still operating her mail order business, and I read by this point she was also operating a phone sex business, she was getting really bold and brave with all the stuff she was doing. Yeah. She was offering to meet men places. She was taking out sex ads in magazines. She was also claiming she was willing to do just about anything they wanted her to do. And she was telling them things like if they couldn't travel to her, they could send her money and she would travel to them. Most times they would, and she would never show up. Just blatantly scamming men from all over out of money.
Yeah.
So she went from being kind of discreet and coy with what she was doing to just outright doing it. Like just straight ripping these people off. So a little bit of money here and there wasn't that big of a deal, but she got greedy and she started taking large amounts of money from people. Most of the letters that she would send were centered around sex and physical engagement in many different situations, and there was a lot of them. Like, she had trunks full. She wasn't making too many friends through this business of hers, but she didn't really seem to care about that. She was only focused on the money.
Yep.
This point on the timeline brings us to when she met Robert Blake. This was an insanely tumultuous relationship. Let's talk briefly about who Robert Blake was. He was born Michael James, I hope I say this right, Gabatosi on September 18th, 1933 in Nutley, New Jersey. He started acting as a child and was perhaps most known in his younger years for his role in a show called Our Gang, or as most people know it, The Little Rascals, where he played Mikey. Yeah, he played the main character, Mikey. In 1950, Blake would get drafted into the Korean War. After this, he had a short stint with drug addiction, where it was said he would not only partook in cocaine and heroin, but he also sold it. He would eventually kick that habit and get back into acting around 1956, which is also when he changed his stage name to Robert Blake. One of his biggest roles as an adult was when he portrayed Perry Smith, a murderer who actually was a murderer, in a movie called In Cold Blood. His next most well-known role was when he played Tony Beretta in a TV show called Beretta, which ran from 1975 to 1978, where he played a police detective. He obviously acted in other stuff between the two, but this one kind of earned him the most recognition, as well as an Emmy Award, so those are the ones I included. As far as him and Bonnie are concerned, I read that they met in a jazz club, but I also read claims that they just kind of had sex in a car before they ever even knew each other's names, so I don't know which one was true, so I just included them both. When she met Blake, she was also still carrying things on with Brando. I read that she was obsessed with Brando and that she genuinely did love Brando. Supposedly, he's the only man in her life she ever actually did love.
Oh, wow.
But I don't know about that, because she ended up pregnant. She told Brando the baby was his, but she also told Blake the baby was his.
Uh-oh.
She really did desperately want the baby to be Brando's, so much so she even named the baby Christian Shannon Brando and listed Brando as the father.
Oh, wow.
Blake wasn't willing to take a chance on paternity. He didn't want to get trapped into raising a baby that wasn't his, or miss out on the life of a baby who was his, so he demanded a paternity test.
Yeah.
This is also around the time that Brando found himself in some legal troubles due to murdering his sister's boyfriend. I also want to add, just in case it's true, because if it is, it's important to the case, there were reports and claims that Bonnie was actually taking fertility pills in hopes she could get pregnant and trap a celebrity. Again, I don't know how true that is, but given her obsession with marrying a celebrity, all the scams she had been running on unsuspecting men for years, I kind of believe it.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't put it past her.
Yeah. The paternity test did come back that the baby was Blake's, so he did what I think most men would do when he tried to step up and be a father, and he tried to be by Bonnie's side. The couple would get married in 2000. The baby would be renamed as well. Her name would be changed to Rose Lenore Sophia Blake.
Oh, I love the name of Lenore.
Isn't that pretty? This was not... Sorry. This was not a happily ever after courtship by any means.
Oh.
They got married, and Bonnie wasn't even allowed to move into like the main house with Blake. She had to move into the guest house. There are many reports of how volatile this relationship was. There were custody agreements that changed off and on. For example, at one point, Blake had a custody agreement drawn up that gave him sole custody with no interaction from Bonnie being allowed, and later they changed that to 50-50. There was also a prenuptial agreement drawn up where Blake stipulated that Bonnie could not conduct any business on his property nor involve him in any of her business transactions. She couldn't have the baby around any visitors, and any visitors she did have had to be approved by Blake.
Oh.
During the next several months, now keep in mind, I know that sounds really bad on Blake's part, and I'm not defending him by any means, but keep in mind that he had an investigator look into Bonnie before he married her and found out all the scamming and stuff she had been doing over the years, and he knew she was involved in a lot of illegal activity, and he's an actor. Like, his name is gold in his world.
Yeah.
So, I'm not saying it's right, but I understand his reason for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that part I did. I don't understand the reason why he made her stay in the guest house?
Because there was no love there. He only married her out of obligation for the baby.
Okay.
Like, he would only allow her to come into the house. I read, like, he would only allow her to come into the house for sex. That's it.
Okay.
So,
wow.
So, as you can imagine, with all that information, during the next several months, things would get pretty tense between the two, which we will get into that in just a minute. But for now, let's talk about the night of the murder. The murder took place on May 4th, 2001, outside of a restaurant called Vitello's, where the couple had just had dinner. According to Blake, they had gone out to their car, but he realized he had left his gun in the restaurant, so he went back in to get it, and when he returned to the car, Bonnie had been shot. I'm gonna say before we get into the scene that this whole circumstance was rather unusual and suspicious all the way around, and how it ends like it does is beyond me. I'm just gonna say that right now. But nonetheless, let's get into it. So the first thing to discuss is where Blake parked the car. He chose to park the car a block and a half away from the restaurant, behind a dumpster on a street that didn't have a working street lamp. Oh, and by the way, the car was a black Dodge Stealth. So, dark as hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's piece together quickly how that played out according to Blake. They eat at the restaurant. They start to leave. Blake walks Bonnie to the car, realizes he left his gun in the restaurant, leaves her alone while he goes to retrieve it, comes back, and finds Bonnie slumped over and bleeding in the passenger seat where he left her. It's between 9:30 and 9:40 p.m. when all of these events take place. Let's talk a little about Vitello's, the restaurant they were eating at. Located in Studio City in Los Angeles, it was one of Blake's favorite places to eat. In fact, it was reported that he had eaten there at least once or twice a week for over 20 years. He was extremely familiar with this location and everything surrounding it. And they were very familiar with Blake and what his typical behavior was when he was in the restaurant.
Yeah.
It was reported by witnesses that Blake was acting a bit off that night. He and Bonnie, according to Blake, had gone there to talk about their situation, but at some point through the night, when Bonnie was a few glasses in on the wine, a witness recounted seeing Blake in the men's room throwing up, pacing, talking to himself, acting very strange and agitated and nervous. It was also noted that Blake had not been drinking that night, so his behavior was not alcohol related.
Huh. Interesting.
Another unusual point was their seating location. Blake had a very specific location he always sat at when he went to this restaurant, and it was booth 42. That was his requested seat every time. He sat there every time. But for some reason, that night, they didn't sit at booth 42. They ended up sitting at a booth closer to the back of the restaurant, per Blake's request. It's also reported that once Blake found Bonnie bleeding and unconscious in the car, he ran to the house of a filmmaker by the name of Sean Stanek that he knew lived across the street from where Blake's car was parked. Blake asked Stanek to call 911 because his wife was hurt. Once Stanek called 911, he would run to Bonnie and attempt to help her, while Blake ran into Vitello's for help. A nurse who was dining in the restaurant came out to help, but Blake himself never returned to the car, nor did he make any further attempts to help his wife. It was around 9:50 p.m. by this point. Stanek was trying to follow the dispatcher's instructions as he frantically tried to save Bonnie, who at this point actually was still alive. She was struggling, but she was alive. She was gasping for air and gurgling very audibly. The people surrounding it all could tell she was alive. The paramedics would arrive shortly after and took over with the life-saving attempts, but weren't able to fully stabilize her, so they decided to put her in the ambulance and tried to get her to the hospital, but unfortunately she would be pronounced DOA, or dead on arrival. When the police questioned Blake, despite him seeming to be in a state of shock, he seemed to recall the night very well, including the fact that Bonnie had been shot twice, once behind her right ear and once in her shoulder. Now keep in mind, that hadn't even been determined yet. So, at this point, all they could tell was that she had been shot twice, but they didn't know if she was shot. They didn't know behind which ear she was shot.
Yeah.
At this point. It wasn't until they did the autopsy later that they would find that out. Anyway.
Something sounds a little suspicious.
Little funny.
Yeah.
Bonnie's murder obviously shook a lot of people, mostly because things like that didn't happen in the San Fernando area. It was a really nice, peaceful neighborhood. They had a very low to almost obsolete crime rate. Right off the rip, police had witnesses to question. The first to be questioned was a couple who lived in the area who had also been eating at Vitello's at the same time as Blake and Bonnie. They claimed to have seen a man that looked like Blake in the restaurant, and then they seen a man dressed like Blake walking extremely quickly past them as they were walking home that evening. They said he was headed in the direction of Blake's car, and it was around 9:30ish. The next person they spoke to was Joseph Restivo. He's one of the owners of the restaurant. He claimed that Blake did not come back in the restaurant twice. He said Blake only came in once and told them that his wife had fallen down, then changed it to got shot and asked Restivo to call 911. This was after he had already asked Stanek to call 911. But Blake would actually stop Restivo from making the call, and according to Restivo, Blake's exact words were, quote, "It's okay, it's already done," end quote. Then Blake would drink a couple glasses of water and leave.
So he didn't go in the first time to get his gun?
Not according to Restivo.
And then he stopped him from making the phone call and drank water.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't get any less weird or suspicious. The employees working the night of the murder were also interviewed. They said Blake and Bonnie's table was cleared and cleaned within a couple minutes of the couple leaving, and there was no gun that they could see. The employees, as well as the customers who were there during the time detectives believed the shooting took place, also claimed that Blake never came back into the restaurant the first time that he was claiming he did, which is the time frame he not only claimed to have gone back in for the gun, but also the time frame the shooting happened, which means he either had no legitimate alibi for that small window of time, or he was lying about having gone back inside the restaurant for the gun.
So either way,
it's very suspicious.
Yeah.
Another important thing to note is that Blake and his lawyer, whose name was Harold Braun, they would claim that the reason Blake was even carrying a gun was because Bonnie was in fear that she had a stalker and her life was in danger. Braun would immediately begin pushing the narrative that Bonnie's past must have caught up to her and one of the countless men she had swindled must have found her and taken care of business. But it wasn't so clean and dry for investigators. They had some suspicious circumstances in front of them and wanted to do their due diligence from every angle. They still had questions they wanted answers for in regards to Blake and his potential involvement. Things that didn't immediately add up for them. For example, why did he leave her alone, especially if he thought she might have a stalker on the prowl or at the very least knew she thought she did?
Right.
Why was this the first time in over 20 years of eating there that Blake didn't use the valet services? Why the booth change? What was he so upset or nervous about in the bathroom during dinner? Why did he park so far away, behind a dumpster in an area he knew had no working street lamp? Was it a coincidence that Blake wore all black that night, including a black hat? Some of these were questions that they would never get answers for.
Oh, because I would like to know the answers to all of those questions myself.
Correct, especially considering he knew that she was a little bit snookered and not focused on what was going on around her because she was slightly intoxicated. But anyways, during the course of Blake and Bonnie's marriage, their relationship wasn't what anyone would describe as normal or even healthy. Bonnie continued to run her business despite the agreement not to on Blake's property, and at least according to Bonnie and some of her recordings that were later found, she continued to see and talk to Christian Brando as well. Then there was the most contentious topic of all: who gets time with Rose? How much time do they get, and when do they get it? The investigators would perform a gun residue test on Blake's hands the night of the murder. According to investigators, the test came back inconclusive, but according to Blake's lawyers, he insisted it came back negative. They actually ended up running two types of tests. They ran the gunpowder residue, and then they ran a trace metal test, but the results of that one were kind of useless because the point of the test was to detect any metal on his hands, and he could have gotten metal on his hands from anything, even the car doors. Blake wasn't just sitting back waiting for the police to determine his fate. On May 6th, he hired a private investigator of his own. That investigator focused on Bonnie's place of residence and her personal effects. I do want to say that other than refusing to take a polygraph test the night of the murder due to concerns at his state of mind, and the fact, as he put it, he had had dreams about killing or hurting Bonnie in the past, so he was worried he would fail the test due to those factors. Other than refusing to take that test for those reasons, Blake was always from day one very cooperative with the police and the investigators. I will give him that. He was. Minus that one thing.
Okay.
Blake's lawyers and the private investigator focused on Bonnie's checkered past and legal issues. It did seem strange to a lot of people that almost immediately Blake and his lawyer were releasing and speaking about information about Bonnie's past and business to social media, not painting her in a very good light. The investigators for the case, not Blake's investigators, but the actual police investigators, they did go on to find a gun in the dumpster where Blake's car was parked the night of the murder, and it was identified as a Walther PPK. Someone had attempted to scratch the serial number off of it, but luckily they did a terrible job. So the investigators were actually able to make out the numbers, but unfortunately, the gun was traced back to being sold at a gun show, and no paperwork was kept on the selling of the gun, nor of who sold it, so the paper trail kind of ended there. Blake did own several guns, and the gun he had on him that night was found to not be the murder weapon, but this Walther PPK they found, it would come back that it was the murder weapon. They discovered there was originally 3 bullets in the chamber of the gun, and that 2 of them had been fired. So, check out this coincidence. The bullets matching the brand of bullets that were in the Walther PPK, they did match a box of ammunition that was recovered during a search of Blake's home, and even more coincidentally, 3 bullets were missing from the box taken from the home. But it was concluded that the casings for the bullets didn't match, so Blake's bullets weren't the same ones used in the murder weapon. Once he heard about the serial numbers being attempted to be filed off, Braun somewhat shifted gears on his focus. He now started pushing the idea that perhaps a hitman had been involved. The police investigators kind of took that with a grain of salt, saying they felt like the job was too sloppy to have been a professional, but that didn't stop Braun from staying in that direction. The detectives would interview a man who claimed he sold Blake a Walther PPK with a full clip, but he couldn't prove that to be true on paper, so that too was a dead end. It also came out that Bonnie and Blake had reached a point of disagreement about their relationship and visitation with Rose, and that Bonnie had feared that what Blake was capable of. It was released that during some of the couple's fights, Bonnie had threatened to take Rose away from Blake, and not only did he become physical with her, but he had also threatened Bonnie's life. It was also noted that Blake made it well known that he felt like Bonnie had trapped him with the baby on purpose, and the only reason for the marriage was because of the baby and his obligation to her as the baby's mother. Bonnie began recording their conversations out of fear of Blake, and he would make comments indicating he would do whatever he had to do to not lose his daughter. Bonnie's...
Well, a good thing that she started recording it, though.
Yeah. It should have been. It should have been.
Oh.
Bonnie's family also reported that Blake was abusive and controlling, and that his only focus and care was for Rose. They would go on to say that he wanted full custody of the baby and he wanted Bonnie out of the picture, so he never had to worry about Bonnie trying to take her from him. They mentioned that Bonnie had told them many times about Blake's threats and his abuse and that she was scared of him. Blake would ultimately be convicted of Bonnie's murder. He was arrested April 18th, 2002, alongside, I said convicted. He would ultimately be charged with Bonnie's murder, not convicted, sorry. He would ultimately be charged with Bonnie's murder, and he was arrested on April 18th, 2002, alongside his bodyguard Earl Caldwell. On April 22nd, 2002, Blake was charged with 1 count of murder and 2 counts of solicitation of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, and Caldwell was charged with conspiracy to conceal murder.
Okay.
The trial began on December 20th, 2004. During the trial, there were at least 2 people who testified that Blake had approached them inquiring about hiring them to kill his wife. One of the men's name was Gary McLarty. The other was Ronald Hamilton. Both men were retired stuntmen. However, Blake's defense team were able to convince the jury that both men weren't credible. Hamilton, because it came out that he was offered a deal to testify, he had some pending criminal charges, and they offered to reduce some of them in exchange for his testimony, from what I understand. And McLarty was dismissed because he had a history of mental health issues.
Okay.
Most of what was brought up in court was circumstantial. They essentially had no physical proof of Blake's guilt or involvement, and on March 16, 2005, to many people's surprise, Blake was found not guilty.
Wow.
How did he celebrate? Want to know how he celebrated?
Do I?
Well, I'm going to tell you anyway.
What?
He celebrated by going to Vitello's. You know, basically the site of the murder.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, and by the way, another fun fact. Blake never testified during the trial, so he never even attempted to defend himself in any way. But
what? Wow.
Seemingly,
that's really surprising.
He didn't really have to, I guess.
Dang, he must have some really, really good lawyers.
Yep.
Or that had a lot of money and a lot of connections.
Well, that brings me to my next paragraph. So, I will say that he didn't walk away completely scot-free. This next part's even more bizarre to me. I don't understand it. So, Bonnie's other 3 children would go on to civilly sue Blake for Bonnie's death. And get this, make this make sense. On November 18th, 2005, a jury found him responsible for the wrongful death of Bonnie and ordered him to pay $30 million. However, yeah, make that make sense. He was found not guilty in criminal court, but in civil court he was found guilty.
That makes no sense whatsoever.
So, on November 18th, after they found him guilty and ordered him to pay $30 million, by February 2006, so 3 months later, he filed for bankruptcy.
Of course he did.
He also went on to appeal the court's decision in 2007, which the court actually upheld their decision. However, they cut the $30 million in half to $15 million. Bonnie's murder was never solved, and Blake passed away on March 9th, 2023 from heart disease.
Oh, wow. That's terrible. I mean...
Pretty freaking crazy case.
Yeah, I don't want to say what I want to say, so I'm just going to say it. I've got my opinions. I'm not going to...
Yeah, tell me you murdered your wife without telling me you murdered your wife.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there were some other points in there that I didn't put in there. Like I also read something about him having painted or written on his wall something about "I'm not going down for this," and it was put off in court like that was some kind of like a therapy that he was doing, where he was supposed to like write down his emotions and his thoughts and things like that. But like, From what I understand, that was the only thing written on the wall.
And what would he be meaning? I'm not going down for this.
Like for her murder. I'm not going down for her murder.
Oh, he actually meant that?
Yeah, I don't know if that's what he meant, but like that, it's be awful coincidental if he did.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, what else would he mean by that?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I don't know, man. I know he's still got family alive and people rooting for him and whatnot, but like, come on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I've got my opinions, but yeah.
I mean, keep in mind too that this is all still around the same time frame that like the O.J. Simpson trial was taking place. In like the same area, pretty much, or right next to it. So, like at one point, in fact, I read that at one point O.J. Simpson even went on a talk show and gave Blake advice about what to do for his court hearing.
Wow.
Like,
okay.
Cuckoo bananas, this whole case was. Like, it was... There was just too much information to put in this. I was really trying to make it a one-parter. It was already 6,000 words long. We're already an hour in. There was so much more information. If you want more details, I highly recommend you go and read the book that I used for some of my information, which I will post a link in the show notes for, and it's called Murder in Hollywood, The Secret Life and Mysterious Death of Bonny Lee Bakley by Gary G. King. He did a fantastic job writing about this case. It's a great book, and I really hope you guys go check it out.
Well, I'll have to check that out. That was really good. You did a really good job on that. That baffled me.
Like, what a roller coaster, right?
Yeah, that was just like...
every sentence that I read about this case, I was like, wait, what?
I don't understand especially the outcome of, like, okay... The jury's like, you're not guilty for murder, but then another jury's like, you're guilty for her murder, basically.
Well,
like,
no, to be fair...
Not for her murder, but wrongful death. But,
right. I mean, it's basically the same thing. They're basically saying the same thing without saying the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, that's one of those legal loopholes, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if, the other jury wanted to be, that way about it, they could have at least got him for manslaughter or involuntary manslaughter or something like that.
I also read that on one or two of the charges that they were trying to get him for in the criminal case, I read that it wasn't necessarily that it was like a clean sweep with the jurors. I think that I read it was deadlocked, and that's why they ended up.
Oh.
Because it was like 11-1 or something, and it ended up being like deadlocked. Not on all of the charges, but I think on like 2 of them. So.
Wow.
Still, really crazy case. Like I said, if you want to know more about it, I definitely left out some details that are really interesting, fascinating details. But for now, that's what I got, and I'm already an hour in, so I'm going to end this recording quickly because I've already taken up a bunch of y'all's time. So,
well, I mean, again, I thought that was really good.
I appreciate it very much.
Definitely still has me a little puzzled. My brain's still.
Yeah, it's baffling. The whole thing is just insane to me. Like, crazy. But, anyway, thank you guys so much for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you've got any questions, comments, suggestions, case recommendations, anything like that, please feel free to reach out on any social media platforms. We're on just about all of them. Email is renderthedarknesspod@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out on that as well. And other than that, thank you guys so much for spending your time with us tonight. Alright, we are Render the Darkness. Bye. I'm saying bye 10 minutes before Fallon. That's totally normal. Have a good night, guys. Bye, Fallon.
Bye. Bye.